Welcome to GV247.tv, the Global Vision Channel, a non-profit web TV channel bringing biblical perspective to the world in which you live.
Hello, dear friends and family in Christ. I want to welcome you back to the weekly programme on Channel 1, and this week we're also featured on Channel 25, Focus on Israel. And that's because our eyes are as ever very much on Israel. Not just because we love the people, but because what happens in the Middle East, and particular in Israel, affects all of us, according to the Bible, especially in the light of where we are now in the Bible timeline and the prophecies concerning Jesus' return and the end of the age as we know it. So, as we continue to pray for the situation in Israel, as promised, we have another Israel update from our dear special friend and sister, our correspondent, Tricia Miller. She's just returned with the latest updates, which you don't get to see them in everyday media. So can I also point you to Channel 14, The End Times, with dozens of programs by experts, and many of them are very short overviews of Bible prophecy as well as much longer programs. And the reason I say that is if you don't understand the place of Israel in the New Testament, please go there and find out why it's so important. Now, if you're already watching on our YouTube channel, just go to our homepage there. That's at Global Vision TV. And under the Watch Now playlist, you will see all our other channels, 1 to 26, and they're all laid out for you. So without further ado, we welcome back our dear friend and colleague, Tricia Miller, and she's the director of Camera's Partnership of Christians and Jews. Now, she's based in the US, but she works around the world. She monitors Christian organizations and media activity, which is related to the Arab-Israeli conflict. Now, her articles have appeared in numerous publications, including First Things, The Allgemeiner, New English Review, Breaking Israel News, Times of Jerusalem, JNS, the Jerusalem Post-Christian edition, and she's the author of 2 books. There'll be details in the description below on our YouTube channel. So welcome back, Tricia. It's just great to see you again.
Thank you, Deborah. It's great to be here again. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
And so am I, and so I'm sure are the viewers. So while you continue just to take a few more moments to recover from your long flight from Israel before you're back to work with us, just like to tell our viewers about something that's happening in the UK as we record this, because a documentary has been released via the Israeli embassy, and it's been allowed to be shown for the first time to private audiences, and it shows actual footage of just some of the atrocities committed by the Palestinian terrorists Hamas against Israeli civilians on October 7th last year, which broke that peace that had been in place really since 2005. Now, I know it was a difficult decision for them to do this, and it required the permission of families of those seen being horribly mutilated, decapitated, tortured, raped, and murdered in many different ways. And that's from babies to old people. Now, it's an atrocity in itself that Israel has felt forced to release this film because the world is again in Holocaust denial mode. Right. And even since the showing in London, pro-Palestinians are saying it was faked. So, Tricia, this is what's happening on this side of the pond today. So on the back of previous interviews that we've done together, I'd like to just hand over to you, and I'd like you to cover a couple of the important topics. But first, would you begin by just summarizing your trip for us? What was it all about, Tricia?
I just returned from over 2 weeks in Israel, and I went because I knew that I had to be a firsthand witness. Because as you've just said, there's denial that this whole thing even happened on October 7th. We've dealt with Holocaust denial for decades. And literally within a few days of October 7th, we have been dealing with denial that what happened on October 7th actually happened. And if some people are willing to admit that it happened, they'll justify it. They'll say this was justified resistance to Israeli occupation, which is all a lie. They're not occupied. Hamas runs Gaza. Israel does not occupy Gaza. So I knew I had to go to be a firsthand witness. So the first part of my trip started with, I was a part of a 6-day mission that was hosted by NRB, which is the National Religious Broadcasters. It's the largest Christian media organization in the world. The president of NRB, Troy Miller, was on the trip. There were 7 of us all together, plus one man who was with his pastor doing a lot of videos, because one of the people who participated is a pastor who also has TV and radio programming. So they were recording. So 8 of us plus the tour guide plus a couple people from the tour company. That was it. We met with everyone from the president of Israel to ambassadors to MKs, elected and unelected officials, and the people. We met with the rescuers from October 7th. We met with survivors. We met with members of hostages, family members of hostages. We went to the car graveyard. I don't know if your viewers have seen that. Hundreds and hundreds of cars that were burned, shot through, riddled with bullets. All the cars from that day that either from the music festival, the Nova Music Festival, where over 300 were killed and many were taken hostage from there, to people just being on the road trying to escape, either the kibbutzim that were under attack. So we saw all these cars, ambulances, totally burned. The terrorists actually targeted ambulances first, wherever they found them, because they wanted to make sure there wasn't going to be anybody who could help anyone who was wounded. This whole attack was quite calculated. It was detailed. They found instructions and maps in the pockets of terrorists that were killed, detailing everything. This was highly organized and planned long in advance. And the taking of hostages was a major part of the plan. They took about 250 hostages that day. So we were at the car graveyard. I'll start with that. We were at the car graveyard, and the man who was giving us a tour and explaining to us what happened in each of these vehicles was one of the rescuers who was there that day. There's an organization called Zaka, and they go and they rescue. They prefer to rescue live victims from any tragedy. They go around the world, wherever there's fires or earthquakes or whatever. They go and they help rescue people. But a lot of the time, what they're ending up doing is recovering bodies. And in this case, on October 7th, parts of bodies, and in some cases, just the blood. But they will recover everything they can to bury it with respect. So the person giving us the tour had been one of the people cleaning up these vehicles after this horrendous attack. For anyone who we've mentioned already, denial, anyone who wants to try to convince themselves that this didn't happen and that the atrocities were not what is claimed, they're just deceived and they are fooling themselves, or they have a purposeful agenda to demonize Israel and just deny that this happened. So, I mean, I've seen it, I've been there, we've seen the videos, but like you alluded to, some people don't even believe the videos. I've heard accusations they're made up, or it's done with AI or whatever. No, the videos of what happened that day were taken by the terrorists themselves, as you said, gleefully rejoicing over what they were doing. They were taking them to publicize them, to get support from the Arab world. Like, look how great we are, come and join us. You know, that kind of motivation. So the car graveyard was one. Then we went to the site of the Nova Music Festival, from where so many hundreds were killed and taken hostage. And then we went to one of the kibbutzes, Kfar Aza. We were less than a mile from the Gaza border. If you stand at the border, the fence that shows the boundary of the kibbutz, right outside the fence is their fields, because they were all farmers. And then right on the other side of their fields is the security fence between them and Gaza. And when we were there, we heard the booms, we saw the smoke of the Israeli bombs. You know, the war is actively going on in Gaza, and Israel is taking out any missile launching site, any site from where the terrorists can continue to launch attacks. So we were there, we heard it, we saw it, and had a tour of that kibbutz and saw the devastation. We were given a tour by a man who lived there, who was a survivor. His particular house was not attacked, but he knew all the people. These are very, very close communities. He gave us a tour and told us the stories of the people who lived in these shells of houses that we were seeing, because the terrorists weren't content with killing people. They also destroyed the homes, and in many cases burned them so that the people would come out, because the people weren't coming out. You know, they weren't if the terrorists weren't able to break into the safe rooms where the people were hiding, they'd set the house on fire so that they would come out. At that kibbutz, we were also escorted by another member of Zaka, and who was someone who was there that day and in the following days, recovering whatever parts, body parts or blood they can recover, so that whatever is left of someone can have a respectful burial. But these terrorists were intent on destroying. They didn't just come in and shoot people. They were intent on destroying the humanity of these people. They tortured them, they disfigured them, they destroyed faces in many cases, beheaded people, mutilated bodies, lots and lots of rapes evidenced by the forensic evidence and also by testimonies of survivors. So this was a calculated attempt to completely deface the Jewish people and annihilate them. And they had plans to go much further that day. They had plans to go as far as Tel Aviv, but thankfully they were stopped. So it could have been worse even. And it also could have been worse if other terrorist organizations had decided to join in. Why Hezbollah from the north didn't join in is actually a mystery, and it's a miracle, thankfully, because it could have been a lot worse for Israel that day. So the effect this had on me, I have come home a changed person. I've always, my entire life, my calling is to stand with the Jewish people, to stand with the state of Israel. Biblically, historically, morally, it's the right thing to do. And I've spent a lot of time in Israel ever since 1997 was my first trip there. I've spent lots of time there, but this was totally different, to actually be a witness to the atrocities, the scenes where the atrocities happened, and then just to hear the people and to see the pain. There's not one person in Israel who is not traumatized. Everybody knows somebody who was either killed or escaped or is taken hostage or is in the IDF right now fighting. Everybody knows somebody. And it's a traumatized nation, but there's a strength there. There's a strength and there's a unity. Yes, there are elements. There are always elements of the far left who are protesting the war, and there's always that, and they make a lot of noise, but they're a very small minority. The vast majority of Israelis are united. They know they have to win this war, in spite of what the media says, in spite of what all the pressure they're getting from world governments, including my own, the American government, to compromise, to not finish it, whatever. They have to finish this war. They have to stop Hamas's ability to ever be able to do this again. And they have to recover all the hostages who are still left. So I'm changed. I am actually sharing in the trauma, because I've felt it, but also the hope and the strength. I'm strengthened, and I'm encouraged by the faith and the determination of this Jewish people who have survived thousands of years of people trying to annihilate them, and they're still here. And I know in the end, Israel will be victorious.
Tricia, if this is out with your scope, I know it was a few months ago, but it's as real and true and happening now as it ever was. But just very briefly, what a lot of people forget is the point you made is this was a concerted and well-planned attack. Could you just again share any of the details about that? I mean, you're absolutely, it was supernatural that Hezbollah, that it didn't come from the north. Although now, of course, there are
Yeah.
rockets being fired all the time. Just a wee aside, some of you may not know that long before this happened, I mean, even the last time I remember we were filming in Israel, it was quite a while back, and we were in the Negev watching the fulfillment of an Isaiah prophecy about the desert blossoming and
Mhm.
the fruits growing out the desert, but you could still hear the whump, and then another one,
Yeah.
because rockets have always been fired at Israel, more or less, over the years. And it's just, and the people in the kibbutzes, those farmers in those areas, um, you very rarely actually get to see the trauma that their children undergo on a daily basis in these kibbutzes. And that's why they had the safe rooms. It
Right.
wasn't because they expected a whole load of people to come after them with machetes and guns, but because of the rockets that were always being fired over the border. And I have footage, and I have had a couple of excellent meetings with Magen David, the organizations that send out ambulances and so on, where we see these traumatized children. Now, nobody, we'll talk about later about the children in the Palestinian territories in Gaza, whatever you want to call it, Gaza, we'll recognize that. But I just wanted to say what a lot of people forget, Tricia, is the amount of work that went into actually planning this. Is there any you'd like to comment on that? The holes in the fences and so on?
It's a multiplied tragedy. These were innocent civilians living there. There were some foreign people living there who work on the kibbutz, a lot of Filipinos. There were people from other countries also taken hostage because they were there as farm workers and learning agriculture from the Israelis who lived there. So these were farming communities. They were tight-knit communities. But the real tragedy, what a lot of people don't know, is these people had decided to live there that close to Gaza on purpose because they actually believed in their hearts that they could make peace with the Palestinian people, that they wanted to demonstrate we can live right next door to each other, we can get along, because they believed that if they extended a hand of friendship, if they lived in peace, that it would be reciprocated. They didn't understand the mindset of Hamas, the terrorists, whose charter, the Hamas charter, says they exist for the sole purpose of annihilating all the Jewish people. And as you said, ever since Hamas has been in control of Gaza since 2006, there has been a nonstop barrage of rockets. So all of these people have a safe room in their house. They go in whenever the siren goes off. They have a matter of seconds, literally 10 or 12 or 15 seconds to get into a safe room. There are bomb shelters placed around the kibbutzes so that, if you're out, you can get into something, but they're small. I mean, maybe only 10 people or 12 could fit in at a time. So they lived with this, knowing they had to have bomb shelters and yet believing that they could make a difference by living there. They employed people from Gaza. So you asked about more about the planning. What they found in the pockets of the terrorists were maps, detailed maps drawn by the Gazans, the so-called civilians, but you can't call people civilians when they're complicit with terrorists. But so-called civilians who worked there, who knew these families, drew maps of the kibbutz so that the terrorists knew where to go. They had it identified where the guns were. They had labeled how many people are in each house. They identified where there was a dog in the house because they shot the dogs, first, because dogs come out to defend their people, right? So it was so meticulously planned And the people who lived there believing in peace were betrayed by the very people they were trying to help. And that's a level of betrayal that, I don't know that we can comprehend without having gone through that, but it's also completely ignored in the news media, completely ignored that it was. And then, one subject I want to talk about is the subject of, quote, innocent civilians. And maybe this, leads into that because after the terrorists broke through the fence with bulldozers and all kinds of ways, and they flooded into Gaza, into Israel on motorcycles and the white pickup trucks that, if you've seen any videos, you've seen the white pickup trucks. Behind them were all of these so-called civilians who came and did the exact same thing, all the atrocities, raping, mutilating, killing, and taking hostages. So it was led by Hamas and orchestrated by Hamas, but it was aided and abetted by many Gazans.
I've seen a number of interviews with the terrorists, and they're very open about what their instructions were about the maps. They were told to rape, and they were told to deface. They were told to take hostages, and I think that is one of the most horrific things out of all of this. And I will never, as long as I live, forget seeing this weird side of these the Hamas, the terrorists actually coming in on parachutes, on these
Yes.
what do you call them again? They were paragliding in.
Gliders, yeah, paragliders.
I mean, come on, very clever. Was it silent? What a good way to do it. But and this is my frustration, and if it's mine, it must be yours 100 times more, that these things are not getting out to the general public. But anyway, so yes, well, we'll talk about the innocent civilians in a moment, okay? And we know there absolutely are. But I sometimes trip over my own words. Is it because I want to be politically correct? No, I want to be biblically correct. And we've talked about the word Palestine and all the rest of it. But just before we move on to the civilians in Gaza, what on earth is happening with the recognition of a Palestinian state by certain governments? Could you just explain to the viewers, Tricia?
Yes, I guess it's been about 3 weeks now. Spain and Norway and Ireland coordinated their efforts. I mean, they were obviously working on this together. They came out with the announcement at the same time. They've decided to recognize a Palestinian state. It's ludicrous because of the history, for one thing, but because of current events, for the other. There is no government of the Palestinian people who govern their people properly. They're not in control. In Judea and Samaria, which the world calls the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority is in control. They do not govern their people. They do not prevent terrorism. In fact, they aid and abet it. They too exist as basically a terrorist government, which is there to destroy the Jewish state. Hamas's intent and reason for existence is to destroy the Jewish state. These are not governments. Governments are supposed to govern, enforce laws, take care of their people, et cetera, et cetera. Neither of these organizations do that. But the real irony of the whole situation is that they don't want a state. The so-called Palestinians, and we can get into defining that term even if you want, but they don't want a state. They have rejected every offer since 1947. In 1947, the UN came up with the partition plan. They offered to divide the land. They were offering the Arabs, which is what they really are, the people who live there who are not Jewish are Arab. They offered the Arabs even more land than the Jews. The Jews said yes, the Arabs said no. And every offer they've had all along the way throughout history, they keep saying no. Why? Because they don't want a two-state solution. They want one state, which is an Arab state. They already have 22 Arab states in the Middle East. This is not about the fact that they need land. If you look at a map, Israel is a tiny, tiny little speck in all of the Arab lands that surround them. This is a religious issue. It's a religious war for them. They must wipe out the Jews. They must wipe out the Jewish state. They don't want two states. They want one state. Their chant that you hear in all of the pro-Hamas and pro-Palestinian rallies is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They're talking about the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. That's all of the land that the current state of Israel now exists in. They intend to wipe out that state. So the fact that the world continues to think, including our government, there's other nations that are considering doing this, recognizing this Palestinian state. The fact that they're trying to do this is against Israel's will. The Israelis don't want it because they know it won't work. And it's against the will of even the so-called Palestinians. But the nations of the world think they can somehow bring about peace if we can just give these poor people their own state. They don't want their own state. They want to take over the Jewish state.
What about innocent civilians in Gaza? We know that there are some, but what have you learned?
Well, to tie this into the subject of the Palestinian state, and the whole push for that, the argument that is being made by the West, they just don't understand or else aren't willing to acknowledge the mentality of the terrorists and the religious nature of this war. The argument that's made for a Palestinian state is always concern for the civilians. Well, back to the state for a minute, we've already had a good example of what a Palestinian state looks like. It's called Gaza. Gaza was ruled, completely by Hamas since 2006. That's what a Palestinian, quote, state looks like. So obviously, we don't want that, and Israel doesn't want that. All right. So to the subject of their civilians, because the argument's always made, oh, if there was a state, then the civilians would be okay. No, the civilians would not be okay because Hamas does not care for their civilians. Hamas uses their civilians as human shields. So there are suffering Gazans in Gaza, all right? The problem is, and as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, I've seen videos of Hamas shooting civilians who were trying to get food. And this is another issue that probably should be covered, is the so-called humanitarian crisis. There is not, but we can get into that later if you want. The civilians who have been deprived of food are trying to get food because Hamas is controlling it all. It's not Israel. Israel's been allowing food in. So that's just another example of how we see how Hamas treats their civilians. So there are suffering civilians in Gaza who have been deprived of food, for one thing, in this war because Hamas has taken all supplies that have come into Gaza. However, it is very difficult to distinguish between, quote, innocent civilians and those who are not. For one thing, the population of Gaza voted for Hamas. They voted them into office in 2006. And recent polls since the war started have shown that 80% of the civilians say they support Hamas. They support what happened on October 7th. And what happened on October 7th, what we can see in the videos and what's been happening ever since bears that out. Civilians have aided and abetted. Civilians, like I said, already took part in the atrocities. Civilians are holding hostages. Some of the released hostages who were released in November already said they were held in civilian homes. A week ago Saturday, Israel executed this incredible rescue operation where they got 4 hostages out, there was one woman and then there were 3 men who were held together. The woman was held in a civilian home. The 3 men were held together in a civilian home where the elderly man is a doctor, a medical doctor. The son is a so-called journalist. However, they are what the world calls civilians. And the world is in an uproar immediately after this rescue. Instead of rejoicing that 4 innocent people just got rescued from being held in horrendous circumstances for 8 months, instead, the world turns on Israel because, quote unquote, again, civilians were killed in the operation. There were no civilians killed in the operation. If you are hiding it, if you are keeping hostages, if you are helping terrorists, and if you are shooting a gun at soldiers who are coming to rescue those hostages, you are not an innocent civilian. You are a combatant. Hamas originally claimed that Israel killed 250 or something. They had some number around 250, quote, civilians again. The figures are 104. Israel does their homework. Israel knows the fact. 104 people died while rescuing those hostages, but none of them were civilians. They were all combatants. They were firing. I've seen the video. There was intense firefight to get these hostages out. Everyone who was killed was killed because they were shooting at the soldiers who were trying to rescue the hostages. So the issue of innocent civilians is very complicated because we all know there are, and our hearts break for anyone who is suffering, who doesn't want to be there. I've seen some videos of Gazans protesting Hamas and saying, stop already, let the hostages go, end this war. It's all in Hamas's control. They can end this war in an instant. They can say, okay, we quit and let the hostages go. Otherwise, Israel's going to keep doing what they have to do to rescue these hostages. So I have seen Hamas civilians on video saying enough and protesting, but the vast majority are supporting the efforts. The other last thing I'll say is that the other complicating fact in this is that the terrorist addresses civilians. So when Hamas releases figures that say how many civilians are killed, they don't distinguish between terrorists and other people. They're all civilians, Hamas can claim, because they're all dressed as civilians. So their figures are totally worthless for trying to identify civilians.
So the humanitarian crisis, I'm just going to hand over to you to explain.
One of the briefings that we had while I was on part of this mission in Israel was from a spokesperson from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He spent an hour with us. He gave us a briefing and we had a chance to ask a lot of questions. But one of the things he pointed out, which I was aware of from my work at camera, but he gave us a lot more detail. The whole world claiming that there's a humanitarian crisis and everybody has to be sending in food was not true to begin with, because what the world does is they want to blame Israel. There have always been 4 crossings from Israel and Egypt. Egypt is complicit in this too. One of the borders of Gaza is Egypt. The world always just, focuses on Israel, and if they don't think food's coming in from Israel. Egypt is complicit. Egypt has a crossing, and Egypt had closed that crossing. Why? Because they don't want people escaping Gaza into Egypt. They don't want the people escaping, so they had closed the crossing. But there are 4 crossings. Plus, America decided to put on some kind of a show and build a pier, to bring in stuff. To me, the implication was, we have to come and build this pier because Israel's not letting food in, which is totally false. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of trucks that go over the border daily into Gaza. That never stopped during the war, when the war started. And in the last couple of months, it's increased because the world has been sending supplies, because the world believes Hamas's lie that there's a famine that Israel's causing. Israel's trying to starve the people to death. Finally, yesterday, Monday, the Famine Review Committee of the United Nations. Now, for this to come from the United Nations is really something, because the United Nations is consistently anti-Israel. But the Famine Review Committee of the United Nations issued a statement yesterday that came from a report that was published on June 4th, which they didn't release on June 4th. They just announced it yesterday, they failed to find a famine. They can't find any evidence of a famine in Gaza. Isn't that amazing? They can't confirm any famine, and that's coming from the UN. This is what Israel's been saying all along, but of course the world doesn't believe Israel. But hundreds of trucks have been going across the border, and then I have a whole report here that Kojat issued, and that's an Israeli, that's the committee that's responsible for monitoring everything, and they count all the trucks going into Israel. I have an 8-page report here from them documenting all the trucks and certifying how inaccurate the UN has been consistently in their gaps, their gaps of reporting, their gaps of counting. One of the things here that'll just for the sake of time, just one of the things Kojat found, this is a quote, we have identified under-reporting of over 8,000 trucks from the beginning of the war, with 4,880 missing trucks in the month of May alone. That means they are not the UN organization for helping refugees in Gaza is called UNRWA, the UNRWA, the relief workers. And then what Kojat, the Israeli organization that's responsible for monitoring everything that goes on, is saying that the UN was not reporting 4,880 missing. They had missing trucks in the month of May that they counted, but the UN wasn't counting. So, I mean, I could go on and on. We have the data, we have the facts, we have the numbers. Hamas lies. The media decides to believe Hamas, but they're lying. And there is no hunger, there's no famine. The only starvation there is in Gaza is the Israeli hostages. And no one who claims concern for all the Palestinian civilians, they never mention the hostages. They forget them. The hostages are being tortured and starved. The 4 who were rescued on Saturday a week ago are severely malnourished. They had no muscle mass left in them. They were not given any protein the whole time, 8 months, et cetera, et cetera. The only starvation in Gaza is the hostages, not the civilians.
This program has been made for Christians who want to know more. As I say, many already understand, but I will put your details at the bottom, the organization you work for. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. Excuse me. Tricia, I really want to just thank you. I know there's a lot more we can speak about, so we'll do another interview soon. I know your voice is tired, your throat rough with you've been talking about this, you're just back. I really want to thank you for your time. The information you have given has been given so expertly and concisely. I want to thank you for that. Were you going to say something other than thank you?
No, that's all I was going to say. Thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to share.
I wish I didn't have to. Isn't it awful that we have to do this? But I really want to thank you for giving your time so freely, Tricia. And I just know the Lord has done something here, and I thank you. You're very special to us here. So thank you again, Tricia. Until the next time, and I don't think it's going to be too long. I know there's still a lot more for you to share. So thank you again.
Thank you.
So as for you, dear viewer, be sure to tune in next week for the weekend program on Channel 1. But until then, pray. Pray for Israel. Pray that the truth will get out there. At the same time, I know that those of us who have a relationship with the Lord and who understand his word, we know that he is over all. And we know that the God of Israel, he neither slumbers nor sleeps. He sees all this. He hasn't chosen to stop it. He doesn't interfere in the things of men because he already knows the end from the beginning. So we just need to pray as led. So until next week, we've got hundreds and hundreds of other programs to watch, thousands. Just pick your favorite subjects from its own channel here on the YouTube page Some of these programs are very short, a couple of minutes to nearly 2 hours long, but please be sure to subscribe and like any programs that you do enjoy, because so few of you actually subscribe out of the thousands over all the different social media that watch these programs. But until the next time we meet, keep looking up, because your Redeemer draws nigh. And if you can, keep looking down, if you're seated in heavenly places with the Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you for tuning in. Until the next time, God bless. Bye-bye just now. Bye.
This is GV247.tv, bringing biblical perspective to the world in which you live. A powerful free resource with hundreds of short films on a wide range of Bible topics from experts around the world, plus full-length sermons and programs for teaching and encouragement. Choose from current affairs, signs of the times, a chance to voice your own opinion, and special offers on our full-length feature films, documentaries, and study materials. At over 4 hours in length, the Lamplight Project is a systematic 12-part Bible study series, a powerful teaching tool that begins with the origins of life and takes the viewer on a comprehensive journey packed with high-profile interviews, film, graphics, and illustrations, concluding with the return of Christ and an encouragement to stand firm and be faithful. Complete with a free study guide download for both personal and group study, this powerful interactive guide connects to over 1,000 programs with expert interviews on GV247.tv, our free service web TV channel. Does My Life Have Meaning? A powerful 1-hour presentation produced from the Lamplight Project. With a free copy of the Gospel of Luke, this film is crammed with engaging interviews, film and graphics, a life-challenging film to those searching for answers. As distributors for the Jesus film, we offer this timeless movie based on Luke's Gospel. This clear presentation of the life of Jesus Christ has been viewed worldwide and translated into over 1,200 languages. We provide the film with a free copy of the Gospel of Luke. The Daniel Project is a popular TV documentary that presents an overview of Bible prophecy and an encouragement to read the signs of the times. Hailed as one of the best TV films to be made on the subject, DVD extras feature a heart-to-heart interview about the way of rescue. Based loosely on the documentary, The Daniel Connection is a full-length feature film. This fictional thriller incorporates many of the themes promoted through pop culture and social media which affect people on a global scale. Launched at the Cannes Film Festival, The Daniel Connection points the ever-skeptical viewer to search the Bible for answers to life's deepest questions. We've been serving the body of Christ for over 30 years, and if you would like further information, please do not hesitate to get in touch.